I have been studying up on croissant making, and I'm going to be following the New York Times recipe, which, to be honest, I did try once before, and I think the ratios were off. So I'm going to be monitoring that closely today and potentially alternating a little bit, and I'll put the recipe in the description. Making croissants is no joke. Anytime a recipe says 24 hours before serving or requires you to have a tape measure, you are in for a process. I have not made croissants since I was in culinary school. And I haven't made them because personally, I feel like if you can buy a croissant for less than $5 and it takes you more than 24 hours to make one yourself, that is a great investment. However, I do feel like it's something that will be fun to do with you, that we can do together. And I've been seeing lots of content online about making croissants in your own kitchen. And I'm like, how hard is it really? So I'm here to break it down. I am a chef. I do have cooking and baking experience, but I don't have experience baking croissants. So I just was in Germany visiting my parents for Christmas, and I tried a pretzelized croissant. And so I want to see if I can make that too. We've got our KitchenAid mixer. We're going to start with 4 2/3 cups all-purpose for bread flour. Next, we're going to add 1/3 cup of sugar, just plain white sugar, and then 1 tablespoon plus 1/2 teaspoon of salt. A tablespoon and 1/2 teaspoon. Now we want 2 1/4 teaspoons active dried yeast. This is all still going in the bowl of the KitchenAid. And then we're going to stir those things to combine. This is the part where we're going to add our liquids, and this is the part where I'm a little bit skeptical of the ratios. It feels very heavy on the dry ingredients to me and light on the wet ingredients. So we're going to trust the process, but also trust our intuition. I'm going to make a well just with my fingers in the flour mixture here. And then I'm going to add my water, which is just slightly warm, which is good for our yeast, and my milk. And then we're going to mix on a low speed, and hopefully this comes together. I personally think this is going to be too dry. So instead of mixing the hell out of my dough here and risking ruining it, I'm going to add some more milk. And because this is the problem that I ran into the last time I tried this recipe, was it was too dry, and then the yeast never really had a chance to develop because the dough was so overworked in order to get it to come together. This is definitely looking much better. You can kind of see the dough is coming together. There's still just a little bit of dry down in the bottom. It's a little bit sticky, so I'm going to let this keep going for another minute or so, but this is looking much better than where we were at. We're looking for it to come around the hook, which it has done. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the kneading process there because it's going to get some more kneading when I add the butter here after its first rest period. The next step is to get a damp towel. I'm going to get some water on this and then cover our bowl with the damp rag or damp towel and let it sit for 10 minutes. While that's resting, I've cleaned up my station a little bit because the chaos was really getting to me. And then 2, I'm going to go ahead and get my butter ready because that's my next step. Make sure you can see my hands. Okay, so we want 1/4 cup of chilled butter, which is going to be half of this stick. I am using Kerrygold butter and a mixture of Kerrygold butter and French butter for this recipe. And I'm going to just cut these into some smaller pieces so that it's easy to incorporate into my dough once it's done resting. Our 10-minute resting period is up. We're gonna go ahead and add our butter. We're letting this baby go for 8 to 10 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and say that this is good. Lightly flour my surface. This feels a little sticky. And it's so sticky. I am wondering if I added just a little too much. We're gonna find out. Okay. We're gonna shape a nice round ball, and then we're gonna cut it into quarters, not all the way, but just a slice, so that as it rises, it opens into more of a square, which is gonna make it easier for us to roll out. So we're gonna slice this way, and then this way. Then we're gonna cover this with plastic and let it rest for 45 minutes, which is the amount of time it's gonna take me to go walk my dog. We want it to just about double in size. All right, it is now Wednesday, January 7th at 11 a.m. and we are on to step 2 of making croissants. Before we roll out our dough, we're gonna go ahead and get our butter block ready, which I could have done last night and I didn't. We want 3 sticks of butter, a rolling pin, a piece of parchment. Our goal is to create an 8-inch block of butter. This is gonna get layered into our dough here in a second. 1 stick, and then this I'm gonna cut in half. It's okay that they're not the same because we're gonna use our rolling pin to push it out. So I'm gonna fold my parchment over and start to hammer the butter down. Not gonna lie, that was a little slippery. I'm gonna try putting a rag underneath. I think that will help. Yeah, hold it in place better. We're going for a relatively even block. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and see. I know I'm getting close to 8 inches here. Yeah, I'm right about at 7. So I'm gonna keep going just a little bit more. I'm getting pretty close. I'm gonna square it off a little bit because I do want it to be pretty exact, and then roll it out just one more time. And then we are gonna chill this. So even though it's pretty soft right now, it is gonna firm up again. All right. Fold this back over. Put those pieces back in. This is what's gonna create our laminated effect, meaning layers upon layers of butter and bread. So this butter layer is gonna go into our dough and get folded in over and over and over and over again. Let me see how close we are. 7.5 inches, so close. That feels pretty good. I'm just checking it with my hand to see if that feels relatively smooth. Again, it's not completely even, but I think that's probably about as even as I'm gonna get. My butter is gonna go back in the fridge because we want this to be completely chilled before we start the folding process. And while I'm in the fridge, but I'm gonna go ahead and pull out my dough, my little dough baby, and we're gonna start to roll that out. So this did rise some overnight. It is very firm. I think the fact that there is butter in the dough already, and once the butter gets cold, it gets hard. So it is relatively firm, but we're gonna go ahead and roll this out into a sheet next. I'm gonna lightly flour my surface. Gonna release this bad boy from the KitchenAid. Come on, baby. I thought about spraying the bowl before I put it in yesterday, and I didn't because that wasn't in the recipe, but I might recommend that if you're going to do it, either that or doing like just a little bit of flour. Okay, I don't want a lot. I just want enough so that it's not sticking to the table or to my rolling pin. I'm gonna use just the heel of my hand to press this into roughly a rectangle, which is part of what those slashes were done to help with. This we also are going to want to have be 8 inches so I need 1 more inch, so that our lovely butter pad that we just made fits exactly in the dough. Is that about? Yep. Okay. Now I'm going to move this just briefly to get some plastic wrap. Now I'm going to place my dough in the center and fold in the plastic wrap and wrap it all up. From here, I'm going to gently roll it out, I believe. Hold on, let me check my instructions. And roll it down to 8-inch square with straight sides and right angles. Cooking is math and cooking is science. If you don't like either one of those things, you are not going to enjoy cooking. An 8-inch square, which is interesting because I guarantee that I need to roll it out some more in order to get the butter layers in there. I bet that's the next step, but I'm getting ahead of myself. My yeast hasn't totally dissolved, which is making me slightly anxious. It's a larger grain yeast, and I can see some of it still. So I'm curious about what that's going to be like as I continue the project. Okay, I'm like 8.5 and 9.5, but I don't know that I can push it back together much at this point. We'll do a little bit. I square it off just a little bit more, and then this is going to go in the freezer. The butter is in the fridge. The dough is in the freezer. We're going to let that sit for 20 minutes, and then we'll start the first laminating process. Probably like, why are we putting this in the fridge and the freezer? Doesn't that slow down the yeast and the growth and the arising and all of that? And yes, that is exactly the point. We want to slow down the rising until we're ready to bake them, because we're not wanting a big fluffy product as we're rolling that butter in. We want it to stay pretty cold so that we can get that really compact, like dough, butter, dough, butter, dough, butter layers. And then when they rise, we'll get that nice, fluffy, flaky result. And it's time for the next step. We're gonna take our dough out of the freezer. Our goal is for our dough to be colder than our butter. Now we're going to take our butter out of the fridge, and we're ready. We've got our dough here. We're going to go ahead and take it out of the plastic, but we're going to need the plastic again, so if you would like to be kind to the earth, we can go ahead and set the plastic aside so that we could reuse that. Again, lightly floured surface. We're going to set our dough here. And then we've got our block of butter ready over here. We're going to roll our dough out, keeping it the 8 inches diameter this way, but till we get to 16 inches in length. A good rule of thumb when you're rolling something out, 1, you want even pressure. You're pushing from your palms, not from your fingers. You're going to get more even pressure from your palms. But I'm starting kind of from the center of the dough and then working backwards and then working forwards. So we want it to stay the same level of thickness throughout the whole slab. This is what I'm talking about with my yeast. I can still see the grains, which I'm wondering if I just needed to dissolve that more in water ahead of time. We'll see what happens as we continue the process. Now, we're going to take our butter and we're going to flip it onto our dough. Peel back the parchment. And from here, this is where having this squared is going to be helpful. Remember, mine wasn't totally even. We're going to stretch the corners of the dough over the butter. We're wanting to completely encase the butter. So I'm going to need to do a little bit of stretching here in order to make sure that that happens, because my dough wasn't totally square, and to be honest, neither was my butter. You just want a seam right here. We're not trying to wrap this truly like a present. Like, we just want a seam, and we want to get it all tucked in. So stretch, pull, pinch. The plastic surgery of baking right here. I'm so tired, you guys. I apologize for any jumbled words and any punchy humor. That looks pretty good to me. From here, we do want to make sure, right, like this is how we started. We do want to make sure that we've turned the dough so that our seam right here is running vertically. And then we're going to take our pin perpendicular to the seam and start rolling it out. We want to do this until our entire beautiful croissant slab is 24 inches long. I'm going to go about this at a relatively slow pace because, one, I don't want to squeeze the butter out of the edges. I want it to all stay tucked in. And two, I'm not trying to expand the width much. I'm just trying to increase the length, and God help me, the jokes that I'm not saying in the making of this video. This is gonna take a few minutes. We've got, again, the oil that's making me nervous is this yeast. God. Okay, I'm gonna Google that here in a second. But I've got my 24 inches. As I was rolling it out, I was every once in a while just picking this up to make sure that it wasn't sticking to the table. We don't want any excess flour on it, which at this point I've done a good job of keeping that really minimal. We're gonna take a knife and we're gonna go ahead and square our edges off to make sure that they are perfectly straight. That looks good there. You can use a knife, you can use a dough cutter, whatever you have on hand. I'm also checking to make sure, yep, I've got butter evenly throughout those layers. You can see the butter on the inside there. And now we're gonna make what's called a book. We're gonna fold, starting the furthest away from you, in towards the center. Don't press it down yet because I wanna make sure that I approximated correctly. And then the bottom in, and we're gonna leave just a tiny gap in between. My butter's peeking out under my dough there. I'm not gonna worry too much about that. One, because I don't totally know what I'm doing, so I don't really know exactly what to worry about at the moment. But also because this is gonna end up on the inside of this book, and so I think it's gonna be fine. It's not gonna be exposed. I'm gonna gently press down to make sure that my layers have adhered. This is our first real step in the lamination process. And then I'm gonna fold it over one more time. And now we have what's called the book. I've got 4 layers. We're gonna measure, because if this is thicker than 1.5 inches, which mine is, we're gonna wanna roll it out just a little bit to make sure that it stays 1.5 inches or below. But I'm gonna try to do this quickly because I am not wanting the dough or the butter to heat up too much. I'm trying to work it as little as possible. 1.5 inches, God, we're good. Okay, our plastic, because we love the earth, we're gonna reuse it. We're gonna go ahead and rewrap this, and then this beautiful croissant book that we just made is going back in the freezer. This time though, it's not going in for 20 minutes, it's going in for an hour. which makes sense because we started with 1 layer and we now have 4 layers. So we're multiplying the amount of time that it needs to be in the freezer. Throw it back in here. Set a timer for 1 hour. I'm gonna go do some laundry, some other miscellaneous things, and then we'll be back. Okay, so I know that I corrected on the screen what the timeline was. I did catch it in time. So this has been in the refrigerator for the past hour. I'm gonna go ahead on my lightly floured surface. I'm rolling this till it's 3/8 of an inch. That's very small. 3/8 of an inch is just under half an inch. So we're gonna follow the instructions. We're semi-trusting the process at this point, even though I have found a couple errors with the recipe. So we're keeping it about the same in terms of width. We're gonna gently roll this out till it's pretty flat. I did, while this was chilling, did some research about the yeast, which is another adaptation I'm gonna make to the recipe. For active dry yeast, you typically bloom or proof that in the water first before adding it in with the dry ingredients, which I was surprised in this recipe that they had you mix the yeast, the salt, the water, the flour together and then add the liquids. That would be a good process if you're using instant yeast. But the recipe called for active dry, which is what I used. But because it was so heavy on the dry ingredients, I don't think that the yeast had a chance to fully bloom. But based on the fact that my dough did rise, and even like the little scraps that I had cut off earlier when I left them out, they were rising as well, is telling me that the yeast is still active, so it's not dead. And I'm hoping that since it's mostly been chilled, it just hasn't had a chance to fully activate. I'm hoping that that will change. The fact that it is active is making me feel confident enough to keep going with the recipe and to not start all the way over. I think there's a chance that the yeast adds some texture to the croissant. That's my only real concern at this point. So let's check where we're at. We want 3/4 of an inch. We're almost there. It needs to be rolled out just a little bit more. So now we're gonna fold this into thirds. For the sake of keeping everything squared, I'm gonna do just a light trim on the corners, and then we're gonna fold this into thirds. Like this. This is called a simple turn and is adding 3 layers in. So we're really starting to multiply the layers now at this point. I'm gonna go ahead, just lightly press it with the rolling pin to make sure that those layers adhere and stick together. And then we're gonna rewrap this, put it in a freezer for 15 minutes, and then put it in the refrigerator for another hour. Grab my same piece of plastic again, wrap it back up. Time to chill one more time. It's been an hour and a little bit of change because I fell asleep. I took a nap. I'm still waking up, but my sleepy self is ready with my block of dough for the last step for today. And then this baby goes back in the fridge for overnight. And tomorrow I will finally have croissants. As you can tell, I'm not worried about wiping the flour off of this table in between every set because I figure why clean it all up just to reflour it. I'm rolling this into a very large rectangle. We're going 14 by 17 inches. That's the dimensions for croissants. If we were doing pain au chocolat or if we were doing like ham and cheese croissants, we would have slightly different dimensions, but we're just going for the classic thing. 14 inches, so got to roll this out almost double by 17. Okay, I'm at 11 inches by 13 and a half, so we're getting close. There we have it. This is not perfectly symmetrical, but it's going to work, and I don't want it to warm up anymore. I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this in plastic. We're gonna wrap this, freeze for 20 minutes, either on a cookie sheet or on a cutting board. My cookie sheet's a little too small for this because I have a tiny oven, so I've got a big cutting board that I think I can put it on. Freeze for 20 minutes, and then it's gonna refrigerate overnight. So other than moving it from the freezer to the fridge, I'm not touching it again today, and then we'll do the final steps tomorrow. That's where we're at for today. I'm officially dusting the flour off of my hands for the rest of today, and I will see you here tomorrow morning, and we'll go from there. All right, it's now Thursday, January 8th. We are on our third day of making croissants, and today's the day.
Today's the day! The sun is shining, the tank is clean.
We're gonna go ahead, we're gonna get our oven ready for proofing, we're gonna get our croissants rolled out, and we're gonna bake them. I've got my dough slab here. I want to lightly flour my surface again, and then we're gonna unwrap this and place it here. We wanna make sure that we still have 16 inches, which we're a little shorter there. We remember we were 14 and 17, and it shrunk a little bit. So we're gonna go ahead and roll it out just a little bit more. We need those even dimensions in order to create an even number of croissants and evenly proportioned croissants. 13 by 17. I am giving myself just a little bit of extra margin because I know that some of my edges here are uneven, and I'm going to be trimming those off, and I want my base to still have the correct dimensions. So just be mindful of that as you're rolling it out. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and trim so that we've got an exactly square slab that we're working with. I'm not totally even there on the corners. I'm going to try to fudge that. We're going to make it work. Now that we're working with a totally square piece of dough, let me double check my measurements. I still want this to be 16 inches. I'm just right under 16, and this to be 14. I'm at 13. I think that's gonna be okay. The bigger concern for me is this way, because this is what I'm cutting my croissants. I'm gonna press this out just a little bit to make sure that I've got a full 16 inches. Never have I measured so much in cooking before. Okay, so we want 4 by 14, or in my case, 13 rectangles. I'm gonna go ahead and make my cuts here. This recipe is gonna yield 8 croissants. Like that. That was a little, just a smidge off there. Okay, like this. From here, I've got it, I pulled my sheet pan over. I'm gonna get some parchment on my sheet pan. What we're gonna do is we're gonna cut these into triangles. I'm gonna do a little bit of measuring along the way so that I make this as neat as possible, because that's a pretty big cut to make. Let's see, the halfway point is here, and I need it to be 2 inches at that point. Try to eyeball it from there. Ooh. You're gonna stretch this a little bit, so it's gonna be okay that I didn't get that totally even. There's 1. Here is 2. Okay, let's go ahead and do that with the rest of them. accidentally did my first one as a time lapse. So we're gonna do it again. This time you can actually see what I'm doing a little bit better and hear me talk it through. We're wanting this to be at least 3 inches at the widest end. Mine is more than that, which I think is gonna be okay. I think it just means it's gonna be a slightly bigger. I'm looking for it to be fairly even. And then taking this end, I'm gonna roll it all the way to the point. All right, second croissant. I've got all 8 of my croissants. I'm feeling very, very proud here. Sure enough though, I'm only fitting 4 onto a sheet tray. My plan is to go ahead and proof and bake these 4. And I'm gonna put these 4 back in the refrigerator. This will be a little bit of an experiment to see how that works, but my thought is we'll keep these cold. We'll go ahead and keep moving through the process with these, and then I can plan to proof and bake these later. I am also going to go ahead and, using my same plastic I've been using this whole time, just lightly cover them, and then I'll put them in the oven. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and place my croissants into my oven. I'm gonna pull the pot out at this point. It's created some steam, it's created some moisture in there. But remember that our oven is not on. We don't want it to be hot, otherwise the butter is gonna ooze and melt out. We don't want that. We want it to be just warm and moist enough that our yeast activates, and we're looking for our croissants to double in size. That's probably gonna take a couple of hours. In the meantime, I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna sprinkle this with just a little bit of flour so they don't stick. I'm gonna put my other 4 croissants in here and cover it with plastic and put it back in the refrigerator, and I will enjoy these beauties at another time. We're gonna wait some more. Again, a lot of this process is waiting and trying to be patient. We don't wanna poke our croissants, we don't wanna jostle them, we wanna let them do their thing and not rush the process. If we rush the process and we don't let them fully proof, then we're not gonna have that really light, fluffy, flaky consistency that we have been working so hard for. So I'm gonna set my timer for about 2 hours, and then I'll come back and check on them. And then we have one more step before baking, which is we're gonna pop them back in the refrigerator for about 20 minutes. We want them to be cool again before we bake them. Okay, I just got back from running errands. We're gonna check. I had a little spoon in here. Crack, I said that it wouldn't get too hot. Let's see how these guys are doing. The butter definitely didn't ooze out, which is good. They've risen a little bit, but I think honestly that they still need a little bit more time. So I'm gonna let them go for another 30 minutes. Check number 2. Gonna put these in the fridge for 20 minutes, and then it's time to bake. While those are in the refrigerator, cooling back down, this is gonna help with the baking process for the butter to be cold when they go in. That's gonna help us actually, again, create that like big rise that's gonna give us that nice flaky, fluffy, light texture that we know and associate with croissants. But while they're in the fridge chilling, I'm gonna go ahead and preheat my oven to 375. All right, the time has come for the final steps. We're gonna go ahead and do an egg wash with an egg, a little bit of heavy cream. Gonna mix those 2 together. With my pastry brush, I'm gonna just gently brush every layer with my egg and cream mixture. It's a little bit thick, both because oops, of the egg and the heavy cream, but you just need just a little bit, enough to give it a nice, glossy, crispy brown crust. Here's our before. Woo! Come on, little guys. I believe in you. they're in. I set the timer for 20 minutes. I'm going to check them, rotate them, and they'll probably need another 10 to 15. If you are craving a croissant, making one from scratch is not the way to go. You should definitely buy one. That is a takeaway that I'm taking away from this experience. In terms of, well, you know, we don't know how they're turning out yet, so still fingers crossed on that. But in terms of the process, I would say probably the biggest thing that I've learned so far in this process is that you do need a general understanding of baking or cooking, I think, in order to tackle making croissants for the first time, especially since the recipe that I was following, which I would think would be foolproof since it was the New York Times recipe, and I've watched their YouTube video and their baker is phenomenal, but there still were two, at least at this point, errors or mishaps that I found that I adapted in order to get my croissants to where they were. And well, hopefully that will serve you in the future. But having some knowledge of baking or cooking certainly was helpful for me in that process and troubleshooting. I would say overall, though, they're not complicated, they're technical, and they take time. But it is certainly a skill that you can learn or master on your own. That's at least what I'm saying now before I see what they look like and what they taste like. So we'll come back here in a second or 20 minutes and go from there. Time to check them. It smells so good. I'm a little nervous. Oh my God. Okay. This is promising. This is promising. Wow. They definitely, I don't think, are all the way done yet. They are starting to get crispy on the bottom, however. So I'm going to try to move my oven rack up a little bit and then put them in there for, I don't think they need another 15 minutes, maybe another 8. Put them up. Hi. I'm feeling pretty obsessed though. Wow. Okay. I'm gonna turn the heat down just a little bit, like 350 or a little bit below for the last little bit. The moment of truth. Oh, I'm so excited. You guys, I made croissants. You can see, I mean, look at all the layers. Look at all the flaky goodness. They definitely are a little darker on the bottom than I would have wanted. They're not burnt. I know it looks alarmingly dark, but they don't smell burnt. And I've eaten a lot of croissants enough to know that they're going to be fine. But I would say put your rack up higher in the oven than what I did from the start. That should help the process. I am so obsessed. I do still want to try making pretzelized croissants, but I think I'm going to do that in a separate video. And I'm going to take the croissants, the extra 4 that I have, and I'm going to freeze them. I think that will actually work really well, freezing the dough. And then I'm going to try turning those into pretzelized croissants at a later date. But I'm going to let this cool just a little bit, and then I'm going to eat one. To be honest, after I stopped that video, I did tear off the end and taste it because I was like, what if they're not cooked all the way on the inside? And then I like have this grand reveal over the video. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and cut it in half so that we can actually see the insides. Oh, it's so flaky. It's still kind of warm, so it's a little bit, that smashed it a little bit when I cut it into it. And I think I could have actually let it bake just a little bit longer, maybe another 5 or so minutes. But the layers are there. I have to say, it's really delicious. My butter had some salt in it when I made these, so they're like a little bit salty, and I really, really like that. I did it. I made croissants from scratch in my tiny apartment kitchen. 10 out of 10 would do it again, honestly, especially now that I've learned some things in the process. I'm kind of excited to try it again. It's not for the faint of heart. It's not to do on a busy week. It certainly needs to be done when you have the time and the bandwidth to do it, but totally worth, I think, the effort. That's what I was thinking. I started out being like, it's better to just buy it, because why would you spend so much time making something that you could just buy? But the satisfaction that I have gotten out of this whole process and how delicious they are was totally worth it. So was probably part of the satisfaction, is how much time and effort went into it, if I'm being honest. But that's one of the beautiful things I think about any sort of creativity, any kind of art. Cooking certainly falls into that category. There is a level of time investment, there's heart that goes into it, there's effort, there's learning, there's growing, there's stretching, all of that. And then when you're done, you have something that you can use, that you can gift to yourself, that you can gift to other people. And that's just really deeply satisfying. So I'm going to do it again. I'll be back on here at some point showing you another step or version of these croissants. If you're making them at home and if you have any questions, please drop those in the comments below. And I'll see you next time. The dishes could wait. I'm going to be eating my croissant.